Well, I don't think, first of all, I don't think digital art is defined by technology, because when we say digital, we think a lot about technology, and then once you start to think about technology, then you think about a specific format. So I think digital art more and more starts to break away from its association to a specific format. When we think about digital, like 20 years ago, actually, no, hang on, I'm getting a little older than I thought. 40 years ago, you had the internet that started coming up, and we started to see these new digital platforms. Now, over the past 40 years, there's been a pretty drastic fragmentation of digital platforms. Where before we had television, radio, and print, today we have a lot of different formats within the digital realm. And we usually associate digital with one of these platforms, whether it's a mobile, a tablet, television, the web. But what we're starting to see is digital starting to be really part of the environment. It's not something that lives within a screen. So for me, digital art ultimately is something that just gives us more abilities to express. It's just a new set of paintbrushes, if you want to make that comparison. And it's not something that is defined by the technology. It's just something that allows us to create more interactions with humans. I think that's one of the big strengths that it brings, and create experiences that we couldn't have before. So it's a new medium of expression. It's not a specific format. Well, I can't speak for other companies, but I can certainly speak for ours. One of the things is, which is, I'm sure you've probably heard that one before, but to be progressive and to continue to push the envelope and to develop new technologies, but also curating technologies. One of the big challenges with technology, despite all the possibilities that technology brings, is that sometimes it creates a capability, but it doesn't have necessarily a purpose. So through a creative process, you develop the purpose of a technology. So you don't necessarily look at the tool and then try to figure out what to do with it, but you look at the experience and then you figure out what tool allows you to do that. So it's not a linear approach, but it's something that really requires a cycle of exploration, and then in terms of technology, and then you look at what you can do creatively, and that's how you can combine creativity and technology. And I think that's one of our biggest strengths, to create these new experiences and to develop new capabilities as well. But it's accepting the fact that you'll always, as soon as you understand how technology works or its capabilities, there's a new one that's coming out that you need to look out for and understand and know how to use. I think Montreal and the digital art scene plays a very, very important role. I think if you look at, festivals like MUTEC, it's probably one of the better known ones. But if you also look at initiatives from the city itself to install, projection sites in downtown Montreal, what we call the Quartier des Spectacles, and then, we've essentially created a canvas that artists can explore, and I think that's a really, really great initiative that's, that sets Montreal apart from that standpoint. There's not a lot of cities that have those means of digital projection for the benefit of artists that are available. So I think Montreal plays a very important role on many different levels. I mean, even if you look at, the tools that are used in the video game industry, and the video game industry itself, that's where I come from, that's where my business partners come from as well. And you look at the tools, 3ds Max, discrete logic is one of the cornerstones of digital media production from the early days. So there is a lot that's been done in terms of digital media and digital art on a lot of different fronts in Montreal, both in terms of the tools, but also the artists. And so I think we have a very unique set of resources and talent in Montreal. And then you always hear about, New York, or you always hear about Dubai, or like London, or LA, or Singapore, or these massive cities where, of course, there's a lot of things happening, But if you look at a city of the size of Montreal, the amount of output from digital standpoint, like from digital, if you only want to consider digital art, we punch way above our weight. Well, the first portion of the question in regards to, I guess, how we got here from, where we are, I think Montreal, and it sort of follows on what I was saying earlier, but I think Montreal has the right ingredients for a company like ours to be able to thrive. There are some excellent universities that produce amazing talent in terms both of creative and technical. I studied engineering at University of Montreal, and then you have a lot of programs that have to do more with the arts. So that combination is really, really good. There's also a lot of stuff that the government does to help companies. So as much as we don't necessarily have the same, although that has changed in the past 5 to 10 years, we don't have the same exposure to venture capital as companies in the US. We do have a lot of support from the government. And so there's a lot of support for research and development. And then the government of Quebec also offers a lot of support for companies to export their products and services with their delegations throughout the world. And so the Canadian government for that matter. So we get a lot of support to develop, as an entrepreneur, to develop our company. And to bring it to bring our products and services to market, even if those markets are abroad. So there's that. I don't know how much influence we've had in that. We have. I'm very proud of the work that we've done, but on the global scale, it's a fraction of everything that has been done. I think we help people discover these things. Their acceptance, then I think actually their acceptance. It's not so much like should I accept it or not, based on the fact that when we create something successfully, it solicits a sense of amazement. And amazement doesn't need to be accepted. It's a very natural feeling, and one that we want to achieve in all of our installation. No matter if it's for a private installation, for in a corporate setting, or for a public installation, creating that sense of amazement is one of the goals. I mean, one of the things that we say here is we craft memories. So the idea is to create something that will amaze you and that you will remember. And so the way that we do that, I think that's the part, that people discover. It's like, oh my God, I didn't realize this was possible today. So it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, is it's on our ability to develop experiences using technology and to develop those experiences with the audience in mind. I think as long as you keep the audience in mind, understand that you're creating something that will ultimately be for them, you'll be able to create that sense of amazement. If you only think about how to make the technology work, I think that becomes a different, the results might be slightly different. Yeah, I think we qualify under that category. Although these days people say they don't want to be associated with a specific tag, but no, I think we do. And a lot of times you think about art and technology, they're not necessarily seen as part of the same spheres. But I'm really surprised and in a good way when I meet artists and they're like, oh, I learned to code. So there is no longer this dissociation between somebody technical and somebody who's artistic. The technical side is just a means to an end. So no, I think we absolutely fit in that category. And you know what? One of the things a lot also that when I look at the code, that we write here, it's not something that people are exposed to a lot. The users don't necessarily see that code. But when you look at the refinement that goes into the algorithms that are developed, there is a form of art there. It is definitely a creative field. So I think we associate art and creativity a lot to things that are visual or to sound, but I think art and creativity can be expressed in many different ways, and I think a coder can be just as creative as somebody who uses paint or colors to express their creativity. I guess the beginning and the end depends on when you step on the stage. It's I think I'm always excited when I look at something like, for example, the camera that you're using. Like 10 years ago, having a camera like that would have cost like tens of thousands of dollars. Or a drone, for example. Like getting an aerial shot today costs a few $100s, whereas it costs tens of thousands of dollars before. So my point in that is, I look at these technologies, like my phone or my laptop, and I'm like, wow, that's evolved so much since I was introduced to them or since they came up. But what's really exciting is, okay, now think 10 years ahead. Now think 15, 20, 30 years ahead. What is that? And that's what I'm really excited about. So where it's going and, what role we're going to play in getting there. So that's the kind of stuff that I like to think about. I think I've been thinking about that topic. Well, the role of Float4, that is something that I think about every day. But the digital art, I think, is maturing. I think it's also starting to be recognized more and more as an actual art form. Where I think for a long time, digital art was considered like, oh, that's a cool screensaver. But if you look at a lot of installations that are going up these days, they are considered as an art piece in a digital medium. We're no longer thinking of, oh, it's just a video and a screen. And you're starting to see a lot of art galleries that are dedicated to digital art as well. So I think its recognition as a legitimate art form is increasing, and it's maturing a lot. Our role, Float4's role in that, well, I think it's twofold. One is through our work is how we create original pieces of content. In some cases, you have to follow some very strict brand guidelines or things like that. But in others, we have more more room to maneuver. We're gonna, the thing I think with art is that we're gonna play the role that reflects who we are. I don't think we are there we're not gonna tell people what art is, we're just gonna do our thing, But on another side of what we do, we develop a product called RealMotion, and RealMotion is a tool that we've been developing over the past 10 years, and that we decided to turn into a product more recently. And I think that's a role that Float4 will be playing in the future for other artists, to give them a tool to express their creativity. So it's on two fronts. Ourselves as a group of people that create artistic installations, also, and a company that creates a product to help other artists express their creativity. I thought digital art was a category. You mean if there's different categories within digital art? Yeah. That is a good question. Well, from a content standpoint, how we look at things, digital art is based on algorithms a lot of the time. And those algorithms are driven by data. And so from a high level, how we look at things is we have, content that is pre-rendered. For example, the video that you're taking, is going to be rendered to a file, and that stays the same afterwards. But generative content, real-time content, right? Content that is generated at every, 60 times a second, that will use a type of a form of data. So we look at generative content, which is based on data sets, coming from all the data that we gather these days, to create something that evolves, is not exactly this, it never loops, So I think that's one category. And the other one is installations that involve an interaction with a human, right? And those are the ones where you create, this link between the person you become part of the art. And I think that's one of the very appealing things about interactive installations, is that you become part of that experience. And that sense of ownership in some cases, when you're like, you interact with an installation and you see the effect that you have on the installation or on the environment itself. I think that creates a very strong bond between the person and the environment, and ultimately their ability to remember. Or how it entices them to remember that experience. So art that's driven by data, art that's driven by interactions, not a gazillion categories, but and then you have everything that's kinetic, but that's another format. So there's a lot of there's one of the things that we see regularly is that the vocabulary around this field isn't set yet. We're developing the language to communicate these ideas in this new medium. And that's also very exciting. I think as it is now, it's helping to support current art forms a lot. That's where a lot of the technology comes from. Will it become a medium in itself? Actually, I think so, because the more and more that we see digital content, and I'm referring mostly to pixels, as part of an environment, that it's not considered something that lives within a screen. And so I think that will really, really change how we conceive and design environments. And from that standpoint, I think it'll become a field in itself. Well, I think, so if you take that framework of reference, yes, because it will break away from the elements that make it associated to current forms of art. So if you take cinema, it lives within a screen, right? And a lot of digital art currently lives within a screen. But I think, all these pixels are starting to break away from the constraints of a screen. And so once that, becomes the norm, or something, that is no longer considered a huge technical challenge, that's when I think it'll mature into its own sphere of art. But I've been wrong before. Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it is also, digital art has had its fair share of challenges as being considered as a legitimate art form, because it's also very easy to reproduce, right? If you think about a digital asset, you just copy it and that's it. So I think that's why, people are like, well, I can just copy it and then I have it, whereas a painting, the original painting, its value is orders of magnitude more than a print or a copy of it. So I think my question is, how does the fact that, a digital medium or digital asset is something that's easy to reproduce, how does that make it some, the fact that a digital asset is so easy to reproduce, how does that not affect its perception of value, the work that's been put into it, because you can just, with a click of a mouse, just say, okay, I have a copy of it. So I think that's one of the challenges that it's facing. How do you make it tangibly unique? I think that's one of the challenges of digital art. From a perception standpoint, because there's still a huge amount of work that goes into it. Well, okay, there's some, Janet Eckelman, she's not necessarily, the output of what she does is not necessarily digital, but the process involves a lot of digital elements. And Rafika Nadal is probably one of the more popular ones these days. I'm a big fan of what Daily Tous les Jours does. Marshmallow Laser Feast. Even they do commercial work, but I think their work is amazing. Robert Hodgins, I think. Big fan. I'm actually just looking at my Instagram feed because that's where I follow a lot of these guys and girls. But what's his name? But yeah, I mean, all these people who have been doing this for a while. A big fan of Vincent Ouzier is also a guy that I discovered in the past year, and had the chance to run into him a couple of weeks ago at a concert. Then, one of the first companies that I looked at when we started Float4, and I was like, shit, I want to do stuff like that later. Obscure Digital, big fan of their work. Who else is part of the guys from London, United Visual Artists, so UVA, big fan of their stuff. And I'm probably missing a ton of them, but there's so much talent out there. Like that's what's exciting about it, like people just, you don't go to, now there's programs for school for this, but just like everybody kind of got into it through their own path. That's what I think is really exciting about the field.